Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Brandi Burton with Suidae Animal Health. How are you today, Brandi?
I am great, and I appreciate and am honored for the invite today.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to have you on today. Maybe for our group, if you wouldn't mind giving us just a little bit of background about who you are and where you've come from, I think that would be a great start to our conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of have a more unique background as far as how I got into the swine industry. I'm originally from the northwest suburbs of Chicago, so city girl, quote unquote. Grew up riding horses and did a lot of show jumping as a kid, and continued that into my career as a college student. And originally wanted to be an equine sports medicine veterinarian. So always had some aspirations to go into equine. And that's what led me to the University of Illinois for undergraduate. I got a degree in animal sciences there. And I kind of, on a whim, joined the meat judging team my first year in college. And so that was an extra credit opportunity that turned into something that was life-changing. But that's really how I was introduced into the animal agriculture sector. Really love that opportunity, that experience, and meat science and muscle biology is another interest of mine from that. But I was able to surround myself with people who grew up with livestock, and then got opportunities to work with some friends on farms, and also did some research on pigs through undergrad. So after undergrad, I went to the University of Illinois also for veterinary school. And during that time in the summers, there's a great opportunity through Iowa State called the SVIT program, or Swine Veterinary Internship Program. And I did that for 2 summers, where you get to connect with those in the pharmaceutical industry, as well as production systems or veterinary clinics, and then perform your own research. And so that's where I was introduced to mycoplasma research early on, and the swine industry as a whole. And so through that opportunity, I really enjoyed working with those in the swine industry. I liked the work of being a swine vet. It was a lot more than just health and medicine. And so that's where I kind of turned my career goals from equine to swine. And so I graduated in 2019 from Illinois. And shortly after graduation, I moved to Northern Iowa, where I joined Suidae Health Production as an associate veterinarian with them. And so I service all of Northern Iowa and Southern Minnesota, and I dabbled a little bit in Northeast Nebraska. And within the last year or so, my attention has really turned to more of the research side. So about 60 to 70% of my time today would be doing research and doing more field-based research, but I still am able to connect with clients and provide veterinary services as well. So keeps me fresh in the game. And then I have the great opportunity to work with students. So we have a lot of students that come through for externships, and then we also host students through that SVIT program I mentioned. So a lot of fun connecting with the younger crowd as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And those are great programs. The SVIT program is very good. Allows our vet students to have a chance to see some research, get the swine exposure, and some time with usually an external company beyond the veterinary practice that they're working with. So wonderful opportunities. And interesting, I was the same way. I was an equine interest that shifted to pigs when I came through school too. So it's always fun to see how people's careers have changed and the paths we take to get to where we're at today. Well, Brandi, I really want to kind of jump into the mycoplasma. I think that will be a really good start for us to just kind of hear a little bit more about what you've been doing with mycoplasma, particularly in field research.
Yeah, so when I started practicing, I was having some conversations, and we had a couple of clients who had endemic mycoplasma for quite some time. And so brainstorming with Jason Kelly and a couple of the other vets, talking about stabilizing some of those gilts and some of those farms. They were running positive at the time. And one of the questions and kind of thought process that we had was about exposure methods. And so gold standard today, I'd say, is 𝗪𝗵𝘁 and fogging that to animals. So we were, challenged ourselves, well, can we use something more antemortem? Do we have to euthanize these animals in order to expose others to this bug? And I had, from previous research experience as a student, taken several hundred, if not thousands, of tracheal samples as a student. And so we basically took that technique and tested, did a little pilot study where we used tracheal samples, pooled them together, diluted it with freeze media, and then as a proof of concept, we just directly inoculated intratracheally. So just trying to prove whether or not this inoculant source will provide a live, enough live bugs to successfully expose these animals or these gilts to mycoplasma 𝗪𝗵𝘁. And in that pilot study, very successfully, we were able to do that. 100% of the gilts that we inoculated came back positive. And so that was kind of a shock, to be honest. We didn't know how it was going to work. And then from there, we really just expanded on that. So we tested animals or gilts within that barn that were what we called contact animals, some pen mates, some across the aisle, and we found that 95% of those gilts within 3 weeks were positive. Just, not the ones that weren't even exposed. So knowing mycoplasma, that's a little, it was about 1 to 4 ratio as far as who was infected and the rest of the population. So that's a really, I'd say, low ratio for mycoplasma. Are not, it's about 1.1. So it seemed to be a good source and also seemed to spread well. And so we expanded on that study. I received one of the BI award grants, so researching respiratory diseases. And that study was looking at finding a minimum dose for exposing gilts using this exact plan and protocol. And so that was also another successful trial that we did. And so from there, I have successfully eliminated mycoplasma using that technique on 3 different commercial farms. And this past summer, we also expanded into looking at that inoculant source in a fogger. So one of our students last year was Madison Derflinger from Iowa State, actually performed this study and presented it at AASV. But she was able to successfully fog this diluted tracheal sample to a group of gilts and barrows, and they were able to come back positive to mycoplasma. So very exciting stuff. The industry definitely doesn't want to be directly inoculating these gilts and sows if we can avoid it. So fogging seems to be the more preferred way and why we went down that route. But still some work to be done. It is still very preliminary, but some really exciting results so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to kind of go back, you said a 1 in 4. Was that so? For every 1 pig that you purposefully infected, you had 4 that did not, or that then later became exposed?
Yep.
Is that the ratio you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah.
So how about on the tracheal sampling size? How, what's the inoculum size supposed to be, right? So are we, do we take 1 scraping off of 1 animal and that will expose in theory 10 pigs, or kind of what's that value that you're finding?
Yeah. And so that's where the study looking at minimum dose was really trying to target finding that information. And it will be different per farm depending on how hot your mycoplasma is. So this farm that we use as our test farm, we could get tracheal samples, pool them by 5. So I use half cc of PBS to take that initial sample, pool it by 5. And the CT value of that pooled sample is anywhere between 17 to 20 on some of these hotter farms. And then what we do is we take that and we pool about, say, 6 of those and then dilute that in 2 liters or more of freeze media. So it becomes a quite diluted sample. And everything we do is finding the dose. We use CT values just because it's so hard to really quantify mycoplasma 𝗪𝗵𝘁 with culture and growing it. So we use CT values to try to gauge where we want to be. Our inoculant ends up being anywhere between 25 to 30 CT value after it's diluted in freeze media. And then what I do is I use about 8 mils of that solution and intratracheally inoculate the gilts.
Okay, perfect. So another question there is the samples that you're taking, the tracheal samples, can you freeze those and then use them later for inoculation, or do we have to do everything fresh with this procedure?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Something I should have mentioned is we take all of our samples when we're doing this and we actually freeze them in an ultra low. And so they are stored at negative 80 degrees Celsius from the time they're taken until we use them. When we go to prepare them for use, we thaw them and then we dilute it with the freeze media. So they're saved in the ultra low, only diluted 1-to-1 with freeze media. We thaw those, we dilute them further in about 2,000 mils of freeze media or how much ever solution you need. And then we will incubate that at 37 degrees overnight to help wake up the mycoplasma. It's kind of our theory. I'm not sure if it does a whole lot, but we will thaw it, incubate it, and then use it the next day.
Okay, perfect. I think that's really helpful to the audience. And I'm sure if they have more questions, they can reach out to you directly and get some more information. But I want to shift gears just a little bit because you're so heavily involved in field research, and that's something that was a passion of mine for so many years. So I'm always curious to hear other things that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm interested in is what are you doing in terms of antibiotic management and managing that nursery?
Yeah, so that's a great area of interest right now. And we're doing a few different things, and it's kind of indirectly related to reducing antibiotic use. But one of my passions is just starting a pig off on the right foot and really doing all that we can to make these pigs as successful as possible. So a few studies I'll highlight. One that we've done, and that is evaluating their Nextine product. And we sprayed it on feeders and we sprayed it on mats and waters for 3 times a day for 3-day span. And we also ran it through the water for 24 hours. And then we evaluated mortality and weight gain and throughout the nursery phase, and then also all the way to finishing. The data still being analyzed, but one thing that we're seeing so far is there seems to be a weight gain difference in the pigs that received that treatment versus pigs that did not within that first week. And that was really the goal of that study, is how can we better get these pigs to start on feed, to fill their bellies and just be a little bit more active when, during that high stress event. And these pigs that we use were Duroc sired. And so I think we could probably all agree they start a little harder, tend to have some gut challenges. And so we were really excited to see that is a potential difference. So that would be, I guess, one way that we're trying to find ways to reduce the amount of antibiotics just by starting these pigs off better. And then the other kind of different kind of study that we're doing is with NutriQuest, and that's looking at a biomarker for inflammation. And so we're evaluating several different scenarios within a flow, so pre-PRRS, post-PRRS, around vaccination times, a lot of just different things. And we're taking serum samples to evaluate biomarker levels and then comparing that with paired samples of weight at different times. And what we're seeing is that the pigs that have a low biomarker level at weaning, it can actually predict what their performance is going to be later on in finishing. So they tend to be lighter pigs and they have a higher mortality rate. And so one way we're trying to use this information to make an impact is what can we do to reduce inflammation around these high stress times in order to move the bar on performance. And so that can be related to health. If they're healthier pigs, they're going to be gaining more weight and they're not going to have as high mortality. So just a lot to do with starting these pigs and making them as successful as possible.
Sure. Are you at privilege of saying what biomarker you're measuring, or is that not published yet?
Yep. So we're using Serum Vitamin A as the biomarker. But the one thing you have to be with caution is when you talk about it that way, you can confuse it with supplementing vitamin A, and that's not directly correlated. So just be careful with that information.
Yeah. Are you it's the the binding protein that you're probably measuring in the serum, or is it directly vitamin?
Serum vitamin A. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting, and I think once we understand that I think that the correlation between the inflammation marker that you're finding and the fact then that we have these higher mortalities is really intriguing, because especially what I heard you say is low biomarker, so in theory low vitamin A, could potentially have higher mortality later in the finisher. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes. Yes. Yep. That is very correct. Some of the studies that we've done shows a pretty intriguing linear correlation with finishing weight, so pre-market weight. And so and that's more obvious in health challenged pigs, but that correlation is surely there in all of these different trials and groups that we've done. So it's definitely kind of a predictive marker and something to really gauge on where you're at as a herd to try to move the ball above what we call a critical threshold. So 0.15 is kind of the magic number we're using today. And as long as you're above that critical threshold, you're okay. But if you're certainly below that, or you have a large percent of your population that's below that, you're likely to struggle a little bit through finishing. So how can we move that and shift the population from a left curve to a right curve is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think those are great starting points, and you're absolutely right. You know, the thing that I used to preach was first 3 weeks. If I can get them going in the first 3 weeks, I don't really have to do much thereafter, right? So we know starting that pig is ever so critical, and trying to understand what happens at weaning is very, very important.
Yeah.
I kind of want to switch gears on you again one more time, Brandi, but being involved in field research and being a veterinarian who's working on disease studies, maybe let's talk just a little bit about field research in general for you and some of the challenges that you see, and then how you've overcome some of those challenges, particularly when you talk about disease evaluations.
Yeah. One thing that us here at Suidae, we're very, very fortunate to have an awesome client base that's also very eager to learn and want to answer some of these questions. And so like the mycoplasma research that we were done was with the client on their farm. And they understand that it's also going to better them for us to start evaluating these different techniques or procedures. And so we have some great clients that we partner with and are able to select flows that are highlighting the diseases that we're interested in, and really find ones that will that are struggling in particular to what we're looking at, so that we can find the best results possible. So we rely heavily on our clients and that relationship we have with them, that great understanding of what's going on in those flows. And then the other, I don't know if you want to call it a great thing, but we are located right here in the heart of all the pigs. So northern Iowa, southern Minnesota can help predict some challenges, if you will. For instance, we did a vaccine study where we were kind of expecting pigs to be laterally infected with 𝗪𝗓. When you're in a certain area, you're certainly able to predict that a little bit better than other areas. So we kind of use our geography and kind of what we expect within the region, and then also our clients and their flows and their willingness to participate.
Any advice that you might give to other veterinarians or people that are interested in doing some disease evaluations that you've seen doing your own research?
Yeah, I think it's just really jumping in there and kind of really going all in. We really haven't here at Suidae been doing this larger scale research for more than a year. So we're still really early in our infancy. And so it's kind of one of those things that you have to kind of jump in and tackle it. And it's a learning process. We're learning something new every day as far as data collection. Good data is what you need to really rely on. So the why and understanding and helping caretakers understand why they need to do all these extra steps, that piece of it cannot be overlooked. So really going through that step with all involved and explaining why we're doing extra work is what they'll perceive it as. But once they get going, I've found that a lot of our caretakers, because they're just our commercial caretakers that have been helping with these studies, they want to know the results. They're invested in it too. And so once you start to appreciate as a group the goals, it's very rewarding. And so it's one of those things, you just got to talk to people. We've talked a lot of protocols through before putting them on paper, and we change them a lot. But once you get something you're comfortable with, just do it, learn from it, and then the next time will be that much better.
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. I think sitting down, you have an objective, right? You know there's something you want to measure or something you want to evaluate, and you can draw out the prettiest study you ever could imagine. But if it's not practical in the barn, that's huge, right? So I think you're absolutely right by getting the caretaker involved early so that everybody's on the same page. You can nip those issues in the bud so that you're not doing a phase change when it's not normally something they want to do, or vaccine or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And flexibility is also a very big thing. You have to be willing and okay with some mistakes and addressing them, and just being very upfront with how you're going to improve when you have partners you're doing these projects with, how that's communicated to them. So communication is really the biggest piece of being successful in field research.
Absolutely. You had mentioned quality of data, good data versus bad data. And I would say that's something that commercial research or field research gets criticized for a lot. So any tips or tricks there on how to ensure that you're getting good data collection?
Yeah, that is one piece that you kind of have to really keep on and do a lot of quality control measures throughout the process. One thing that's helped us a lot is all of our projects are typically ran with the LEO system, which is individual animal tracking identification. And so we're able to really track a lot of information using the RFIDs and the Bluetooth scanners. And then we can also retain a lot of information with using tags, with DEDs and different pieces of data collection that way. So there's just a lot of different checks and balances throughout the process.
Yeah. I think it's important to make sure that it's easy for that caretaker too, right? That's critical. And as you mentioned, you're using RFID tags. And so, yeah, that's easy, right? That's a wand over it and it's done, or a piece of paper, but ease is going to be critical in the barn.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so I think you've really hit on some good things in terms of field research and some of the challenges. Just a couple of other things that have popped into my mind really when you were talking about the data collection and the field research process was just how do you go about picking out that facility? I know you talked about the fact that you have flow that has certain diseases, and that's always the kind of the starting point, but how do you get the buy-in from the producer? I mean, obviously they're invested because it's an issue, but you just told me you're going to come in and you're going to maybe weigh pigs, or you're going to need extra records, and the caretakers have things to do. So how do you get that complete buy-in from that producer?
Mm-hmm. That's where the why comes in a lot of times. And once you get them on an understanding of all these extra steps that need to be taken, which it seems like a lot of work, and once they get going, they realize it's really, maybe a few minutes of their time per day. It's not a lot. We think of it as a collaboration with those producers, and we pick our spots based off of that relationship I spoke on earlier. So we have some clients where they want to be doing this kind of stuff. They like to be involved in this kind of stuff. They like being on the forefront of information and being able to access that right away, or being one of the first. And so we're able to really pick and choose those clients we work with. And then we want to, like I said, caretakers and that data is such a big, important piece that we're really particular about which sites we use based off of our history with those caretakers. So it's a lot of trust. And that's where knowing our clients and their sites and caretakers is a huge part of making this as successful as it's been.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think those are great pieces of advice for people out there who are wanting to either do more research or maybe improve some of the research that they're doing in their own barns today. Mm-hmm. So as we kind of wrap up our time here, are there any key points that you want to bring back to the surface? I know we hit a bunch of things. We started with myco and went into the nursery and then talked field research, but are there any key points that you'd like our people to take away today?
Yeah, I think one thing I have really enjoyed, and a lot of these things I've actually touched on today, are projects I think that are more outside the box. and going outside our comfort zone and kind of challenging the norm a little bit of what's done today. And I guess I encourage others to do the same and to continue down that thought process, because there's just a lot of things I think we can make so much better by improving on protocols, procedures, things that are done today. And just by adding a little creativity and innovation, we can just make such great strides in those different areas. And so I really enjoy thinking outside the box. I like kind of the weird ideas. And I think that is really something that is rewarding and very something I enjoy, and I think others would as well. If you're okay getting outside your comfort zone a little bit and can convince others to support you in those efforts.
Absolutely. That's how discoveries are made. That's a very good takeaway. Well, Brandi, as you know, we like to ask our guest speakers a couple of common questions across all of them, just to, again, give our listeners a little bit of different viewpoints on the same topics. So one of the things we like to ask is, what's your favorite swine resource?
Yes, my favorite swine resource would be, as kind of a nerdy vet who does research, a lot of the journals. So 𝗪𝗵𝗿𝗃 is a great one. And some of the proceedings, one thing that's great about our industry is those who present their research and their findings and experiences at conferences it's just great how much information we share with each other and how much we can learn from one another. So I a lot of times use conferences and those proceedings. And then at the same time, I like to leverage my network and try to reach out to those people when those who are a lot smarter than me and are more expertise in areas, really building on that network. And I'm not afraid to reach out when I have questions and want to learn more.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great suggestion from a resource perspective. We haven't heard that one in a while. Most of our veterinarians that we've had on go to the diseases of swine. So I think absolutely the discussion around 𝗪𝗵𝗿𝗃 and other scientific journals is very, very useful.
Yeah.
How about something that's not related to pigs? Is there anything that you're currently reading that you might suggest to the group?
Yeah. One thing I really like, and I did a little bit of this as in the end of vet school, was more on the personality traits and leadership skills. So I got to learn under the great Dr. 𝗪𝗵𝗿𝗃. And one of the last things we did in our professional development course was Clifton Strengths. And there's actually a book called Strength Finders 2.0. So it's an exam that kind of tells you what your strengths are, and then the book that supplements with each of those different strengths. And what I've found that I like a lot, especially in our industry, we work with just such a vast wide range of people, veterinarians, those in industry for pharmaceutical companies or tech service industry, caretakers, producers, farmers, I mean, everyone in between. And so really understanding your personality trait and how to work with others and their personality traits, I think has just been really enlightening, and I think is a really great way to, increase communication efforts and just really be the best vet that I can be. So I've really enjoyed those kinds of books and resources.
I think that's an excellent tie back to that conversation you had on communication, because there's that frustration when people are in different personality styles can be very high, and that inflicts on that communication ability. So I think you're absolutely right. Whenever there's communication gaps or challenges, people should go back to items like Strength Finders, because I have to flex a little bit to work with somebody, and that's okay.
Yeah, DISC is another great one that we utilize a lot here at Suidae. Our farm managers all go through DISC and DISC training, and so that's just another great way to continue that leadership program and education.
Absolutely. Very good resource. Well, the last question we like to ask, Brandi, really comes back to just something personal, in that if you can imagine somebody in your head who you've identified as successful in their life, and you define success, we don't define success for you. What's a key trait that you think they possess that has allowed them to become successful?
I think really it comes down to passion. Truly not feeling like your work is work. And I feel very fortunate to surround myself, I feel, with people who I'd identify as successful because of that. They have turned their career into more of a lifestyle. It's not an inconvenience. It's not something they dread. It's something that they really thrive on, and it really motivates them to be a better person every day. And they're doing it for the right reasons. They really want to, just passionate about the industry as a whole versus their own self-success. So that's where I think the greatest successful people, I just think you can see their passion just glowing.
Absolutely. I think you're on your way too. You're very passionate about what you're doing as well. So that's wonderful.
No, thank you.
Well, Brandi, I do want to thank you again for your time. It's been wonderful visiting with you. For our audience, again, this is Dr. Brandi Burton with Suidae Veterinary Service. Brandi, thank you again.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.𝗏𝗏𝑠winenutritionist.com.